For our last demo, let's take a look at creating this empty project, the starting point for a web application in Visual Studio. Now I'm using Visual Studio 2015, and if you want to follow along, this is actually the easiest path. Using VS Code can work, but unfortunately the boilerplate, the starting template for a new web application, even a basic web application, is different between what Visual Studio will generate and what VS Code will generate. So in Visual Studio, before we go ahead and create the project, I want to show you the extensions I'm using so that some of the things you'll see, you'll want to be able to replicate using those. So there's a number of installed extensions here, but the ones to be focused on that I'm going to be using is the Add New File extension. This is an extension that allows you to create an unnamed file very quickly and then name it once you want to save it. I'm also using Web Essentials, the latest version. We're going to be using this quite a bit for the web application parts. And then also Open Command Line, which is another extension that will allow you to open up a command line pretty quickly in your project. And there'll be times when we want to drop down into the command line pretty quickly. So that makes that all a little easier. So let's go ahead and create a new project. We could use Yeoman for this as well, but in our case, I'm going to do it the Visual Studio way, which many of the students watching this are probably going to be following along using the same method. So under Templates for Web, there's an ASP.NET application, and this is the same unified template for all ASP.NET applications. And I'm going to call it the world. And in my case, I'll create a directory for a solution, but that's not required in every case. Make sure all of the other things are checked. And this will show us the existing ASP.NET templates that you probably have seen in some of my other courses or some of the other courses here on Pluralsight. I'm going to actually use the ASP.NET Preview templates, and they're called Preview today because ASP.NET is still in Beta 6 as of the writing of this. Normally, we could go ahead and create the web application. Web application includes a bunch of different parts already built out, but I want you to understand the moving pieces of what it's going to generate. So we're going to actually start with an empty project because I want to show you all of the moving pieces so you really understand the boilerplate that is built up using the web application template. As we need each new feature, we're going to add that package, we're going to add that line of code, we're going to add everything we need one piece at a time so you can really see how it works. In the Visual Studio case, the project that's generated is actually much smaller because we chose the empty template. The only dependencies are really on the support for IIS as a server as well as the web listener for self-hosting. Still has the two frameworks, but doesn't have any of the build tools integrated either. And that's all on purpose because I want you to see these individual pieces. Because we're in Visual Studio, we can also pick how we're going to run this. You can either use IIS Express as sort of the default way to run this, and you could actually deploy this into IIS as well, but that's a longer story. For development, you would use either IIS Express because that may be more comfortable, or it will also execute this web command for the self-hosted version as well. Depending on what you're used to, let's go ahead and just use IIS Express for now. We can set those settings in the properties of the project. When we look at debug, we'll see that to launch IIS, we're telling it the IIS settings. And in our case, let's go ahead and change this to 8000 for the port number. And let's go ahead and run this. Now we're getting, instead of that more elaborate template that we saw created with Yeoman, we're really starting from bare bones in that all we're showing is hello world. And the reason we're showing that is that in our startup CS is where the web configuration happens, the configuration of your website. This class is configuring itself with no services, and we'll talk about what that means, and is simply saying anytime anyone actually reaches down to us and asks us for a request, just write out hello world. We're doing the bare bones of just returning a string, in fact. We're not even returning HTML at this point. And this is our starting point, a completely clean slate of no functionality that we're going to slowly build as we create our website from complete scratch. We'll get started with that in the next module. Let's wrap up this module now that we've given you just a sense of some of the concepts of ASP.NET 5.